there isn't anyone that is turned off by your personal brand, then there likely isn't anyone that is drawn to it either. Today, I want to talk about the courage to be disliked. Grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. In any good branding or marketing, the goal is never to be liked by everyone. It's to appeal to a certain group of people. And when you try and be everything to everyone, that is when you are more likely going to be appealing to no one. When you take this sweeping approach to try to build your brand around everyone's expectations, then you likely aren't going to be compelling anyone. Take, for example, the idea of comparing a brand like Louis Vuitton to Kmart. They are two very different brands that serve very different purposes and audiences. In some ways, they are completely loved by their customers, and in others, they are really alienating to other customers. They serve an intentional purpose. The courage to be disliked is the ultimate mark of confidence. It's being completely unbothered with knowing that there are certain people that you are never going to please, and they're more likely going to be the people that you were never meant to serve anyway. But when you dilute your personal brand, your personality, your key messages, or the way that you express yourself, or your personal style, you risk missing the opportunity to connect with the people that you were meant to connect with the right people, because you were too busy trying to be this shade of grey or beige that appeals to everyone. But when you embrace what makes you uniquely you, when you go after those things that you want to achieve for yourself, despite what other people might think, that is when the real doors will start to open and when you find your people. So today, let's start with the courage to change. And throughout this episode, I'm also going to be drawing on a book that you might have heard of called The Courage to Be Disliked, which was the inspiration for this episode. But let's start with the courage to change to begin with. Because as much as you may think that you are wired for personal growth, for transformation, this is actually something that, perhaps surprisingly to you, goes against your brain's natural instinct, because your brain is always trying to protect you. It has a negativity bias that is designed to keep you safe and away from risk. And how it assesses risk has a lot to do with its past experiences. It goes through all of your memories and all of the outcomes that you have had in the past, all of your interactions, to make sure that it is constantly presenting to you and keeping front of mind through your decision making the safest path that is going to keep you away from that risk. And a lot of the time, the safest path that your brain can see is going to be the more familiar path. It is going to be the path that it has already invested in. So this actually brings me back to a concept called the sunk cost fallacy, which is this idea in behavioral economics, which says that the more time or money or resources or energy that you invest into a particular thing, the more likely you are going to continue to do that particular thing. And this is simply because it is something that you have already invested in. It is related to your past experiences instead of being dictated by what is actually the best choice for you in your current circumstances or in the future. So this is something to really reflect on when it comes to building your personal brand or your professional development and your career, is this idea of a sunk cost fallacy. Have you pursued a particular path because it is a direction that you have headed down for so long? Can't imagine changing directions, rocking the boat, or upsetting the networks that you have spent time establishing. But what I would challenge you to consider is that even if you have spent years, maybe even a decade, maybe several decades in a particular field, is it better to continue down that path for maybe even several decades if it is a field that is no longer serving you, or that you are no longer interested in, or that your skills are becoming redundant in? Or is it better to change directions and not be stuck in that particular direction for decades to come just because of the years that you have already spent in that space? And this is where I really loved the book, The Courage to be Disliked, where the authors in the book break down the psychology of Alfred Adler, so Adlerian psychology. And one of the key takeaways from this is that your present state can't be blamed on your past experiences. For example, the book says, we do not think about past causes, but rather about present goals. And since the book proposes that you aren't defined by your past experiences, that means that you can choose to change. And it says, whether you go on choosing the lifestyle you've had up until now, or you choose a new lifestyle altogether, it's entirely up to you. But the problem isn't often with choosing change, it's that change itself can take courage. The book says, your unhappiness cannot be blamed on your past or your environment. And it isn't that you lack competence, you lack courage. So, to reiterate, the book emphasizes that a lot of people don't actually have a competence problem. What they have is a confidence problem. We are constantly thinking about what other people might think, and this is dictating a lot of our behavior. So this is also a great place to highlight a book that I have talked about a lot on this channel recently, which you may also find interesting. And that is Todd Herman's book, The Alter Ego Effect. I could not recommend this book more, particularly if you are someone who struggles with worrying about what other people might think or showing up in certain high pressure situations and feeling like you aren't performing to your true potential. This is a way for you to strategically create an alter ego for yourself, so a high performance identity for yourself that is going to allow you to show up on those other stages. And it is both a brilliant and a really fun concept as well. So I would highly recommend that after this episode, you watch that episode too. But for now, let's get into my point number 2, and that is to separate the tasks. Now, this is something that was also a really key takeaway from the book, The Courage to be Disliked, because the authors propose that every problem, all problems are actually interpersonal problems. They're relationship problems. And that is because they either have to do with a relationship issue directly, or they have to do with your thoughts about what other people might think. And this is why the courage to be disliked is so important. And the idea of separating tasks allows you to delegate things to other people because some things are really just not your problem. So let me talk about what that means, because it can actually be this really liberating idea. In the book, the authors say, what another person thinks of you, if they like you or dislike you, that is that other person's task, not mine. So this is a concept that is really important when it comes to people that are focusing on their professional development or their career or building their personal brand, because so often it can be easy to worry about what other people think. But when you separate the task, then you allow yourself to shift your mindset into what is best for you versus what other people might be thinking. So for example, say you want to show up a lot more regularly on LinkedIn, for example, or a different social media platform. And this isn't something that you have done in the past before, and you're worried about what other people might think. What they think is their task. That is their problem. What your task is to show up and to be clear about your perspective. It is not to worry about unfollows or other people's social media feeds. That is their task. That is their job and their problem. Or for example, you're worried that someone might disagree with the opinions or the messages that you are sharing as a part of your personal brand or through your career. That is their task. Your task is to communicate your messages with intention without actually worrying about if you can control every aspect of the interpretation of those messages. Or, for example, you might be worried that people are judging you because you have changed. Your job is to leave their judgment to them while you focus on evolving and adapting as your experiences, your environment, and as your goals change. And not be stuck in this fixed mindset as opposed to a growth mindset. Maybe you're someone who is worried that the content that you are producing isn't seeing immediate results and isn't seeing immediate engagement. That is other people's task to like or to not like your content. Your task is to show up. It is to create without actually needing the likes or the approvals from other people, the validation from other people. Say, for example, you might be someone who also is worried about expressing yourself through, say, your personal style or the branding that you would love to have for your personal brand or for your business. Judging your personal style or the way that you choose to express yourself is other people's task. Your task is to represent your personality, your goals, and your values in the way that you are most comfortable. And there are always going to be people that appeals to. Maybe you're worried about people judging, say, your presentation skills. That is their job. That is their task. Your task is to show up. It is to get in the arena while other people can judge from the sidelines. And this idea, this mindset shift, reminded me of a quote that I really loved from Andy Warhol, where he said, "Don't think about making art, just get it done. Let everyone else decide if it's good or bad, whether they love it or hate it. While they are deciding, make even more art." So this was something that really resonated with me when I started this YouTube channel, when I started my podcast and my blog, because I was so used to in my marketing and communications career that I'd spent over 15 years in, being that person who was behind the scenes. I was the person that was writing for senior executives or for the talent, but I was never the person in front of the camera or on the mic. And I definitely was not posting on LinkedIn regularly at all. I hardly ever posted on LinkedIn, almost ever. And now I post regularly on LinkedIn. I share all of my blog articles on LinkedIn. And I've always taken this mindset of having the courage to be disliked since I started to create content. It's knowing that the content that I am creating is not going to be for everyone, but it is so worth it when I have people contact me and tell me that a particular article or a particular episode or a particular video on my YouTube channel really connected with them and they found an idea really insightful or it has helped them in some way. And most often, those people aren't actually people that engage with my content either. So you never know who you are connecting with when you put yourself out there, when you decide to show up. Sometimes you don't have all of the insights and the data. You don't know all of the people behind those numbers. And every time that you restrict yourself from showing up because you are worried about what other people might think, then you are missing out on the opportunity to connect with the people who actually do care about what you have to say or your messages or the way that you present your personality or are interested in a particular skill set that you have to offer the marketplace. When you hide those versions of yourself because you are worried about being judged, you miss all of those opportunities. And all of this leads really nicely into my point number 3, which is to master self-validation. A lot of the time, we are so worried about what other people think because we are relying on their approval instead of our own self validation. We want them to praise what it is that we are doing. And so, if we do anything that could potentially color outside of the box, that is where our brain again wants to keep us safe. It wants to make sure that we aren't risking doing something that is going to cause people to critique us. But when we are so confident in our own self-validation, it means that we aren't as dependent on other people's praise and validation. And this is another really key takeaway from the book. It's this idea of not being so dependent on validation and praise. In the book, the authors say, those who go so far as to boast about things out loud actually have no confidence in themselves. They also say, when one seeks recognition from others and concerns oneself with how one is judged by other people, in the end, one is living other people's lives. And it's also worth noting, if you are interested in reading the book, that the courage to be disliked is told from the perspective of a philosopher who is connecting with this young person and they are mentoring them, which is where you might have noticed some of that language that is creeping into some of those quotes. So it's trying to teach Adler psychology through this particular storytelling lens. So, what are some of the ways that you can start to focus on self-validation? One of my favorite ways that I love to talk about on this channel is the idea of building in silence. When it comes to traditional personal branding advice that's out there, so much of it focuses on celebrating all of your wins out loud and being the loudest voice, the strongest voice, to making sure that you communicate and you self-promote so many of your achievements. Whereas what I love is the approach of building in silence, because I do think that this is the ultimate power move. It's the most confident power move because it means that you don't actually need the validation. So not every achievement that you have needs to be announced. Not every project that you are working on needs to be announced. And it's not that you can't share some of the things that you are doing, because there is definitely a place for that in personal branding. And I actually think that that is a big part of personal branding, is taking people behind the scenes in your process and in your projects. But it doesn't need to be all of them. It doesn't need to be everything. You can choose to share whatever you decide you want to share. It is totally up to you to decide what is for other people and what is just for yourself. The other thing I would do to build your self-validation muscle is to build this mindset of marketing like a magnet. So knowing that not everything you do is designed to attract everyone. There are going to be some things that you do that will repel people. And this should actually in some ways be a goal, because it means that you are strengthening the community that you are creating or the audience that you are connecting with. In a way, you are training your audience on what it is that they can expect from you, instead of just taking them down a very narrow path and knowing that there is this whole other side to your personality or your expertise or your capabilities or interests that you would love to share. You are from the get-go being comfortable with sharing how you are this multi-dimensional person. My other tip to start to master self-validation is to post and ghost. So I, for example, mentioned that I post regularly on LinkedIn, but I actually spend very little time on LinkedIn. So I will post and then just leave my posts. Whereas I remember back in the day when I used to so rarely post on LinkedIn, because I so rarely post on LinkedIn, I would be interested in who was commenting, who was engaging. Whereas now I just post and I leave, because to a degree, I almost don't care. I care about the people who the content connects with. I care about the people that comment, but it's not something that I need to get validation from straight away. I don't need to be driven to create by the analytics or by the data or by the likes that are publicly seen on a post. I care more about what is happening behind the scenes. I care about the people that are reaching out to me. So if you are starting to create content online, or you are showing up on platforms that maybe aren't ones that you have used much before, try and not be too dictated by the data. Try and allow yourself to enjoy the process, to focus on creating. Yes, the data is going to be important because it will help you to make data-driven decisions, but you don't need to make those decisions in most cases immediately after you have shared something. You can allow yourself to have a little bit of distance from the publication of something so that you can focus on creating. So this goes back to what Andy Warhol said. It's focusing on putting the work out there, focusing on your art, focusing on your craft, and letting other people judge that while you're too busy moving on to whatever it is that you're doing next. And my last tip to master your self-validation is to consider starting a journaling habit if you haven't already. And as I've shared on this channel, my absolute favorite journaling technique is the morning pages technique. This is something that I've started to do really consistently for over a year now. And as I've mentioned, it is one of my favorite new habits because it allows you to process all of your own thoughts. That is one of the biggest benefits when it comes to journaling. It allows you to emotionally self-regulate, to process your experiences without necessarily needing any validation from other people. So if you haven't already, then make sure you check out that episode as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.